And I call the member for Goldstein.
Well, thank you, Deputy Speaker. And Deputy Speaker, it's a privilege to be able to speak in support of this bill in its original form, rather than the elite signalling of members of the opposition who like to move amendments to the government legislation so that they can say some things are good or some things are bad, mostly for their own indulgence and their ego, and to demonstrate that they're actually doing something in their job as a shadow minister. And of course, we do need to give them credit sometimes. They do need to demonstrate to the public some relevance, because at the moment they can't see that. Both in terms of the coronavirus pandemic, where they're directly undermining the vaccine rollout, or the policy debates that inform the direction and the future direction of this country generally. I mean, it comes to the financial advice space and the financial services sector, where you see the Labor Party at its hubristic worst, where they seek to continue to demonise and dominate, where their alliances with their friends in the superannuation fund sector, who get bonuses paid up to $35 million, get paid out without any criticism. In fact, Deputy Speaker, the other day we had an Economics Committee public hearing with the superannuation sector. We had the mega fund investor on behalf of the superannuation funds, IFM investors, appear before the committee. And the simple question that was asked, as has been asked many times before, of its CEO: do you think that payments of up to $35 million in bonuses to fund managers is excessive? Now, I make quite clear, Deputy Speaker, I believe it is. And to his credit, the CEO of IFM Investors, eventually, after prodding and having to ask the question about 10 different ways, he also conceded it wasn't. What was the response of the Labor Party when we asked that question? It was to run interference and to try and shout me down as the chair from asking the question. If you want to see the extent of the relationship where the Labor Party, the modern Labor Party, wants to run interference to protect the interests of their mates in the superannuation sector at the expense of average Australians, superannuants, retirees and individual investors, just go and watch that clip. And watch the clip all the time when we bring superannuation funds before the House Economics Committee and ask questions of them which might put them in a negative light, or where they might have to admit something that they don't want to disclose to the Parliament and, by its nature, the people of Australia. The response from the Deputy Chair, the member for Fenner, is to try and silence and shut us down. We've seen in this inquiry that's run throughout the term, literally super funds who keep saying they were exonerated by the Hayne Royal Commission. Exonerated. They've got nothing to hide. They've done nothing wrong. Nobody's criticising them. They're fantastic. Just look at our returns, where they literally, deliberately, maliciously undermine the superannuation savings of Australian retirees by reactivating low balance inactive accounts so they could harvest them for fees and insurance premiums. So much so that we in this chamber had to change the law to stop their mismanagement and their misbehaviour. But they've got nothing to hide. Everything's fine. Nobody dares raise any criticism or concern. The reality is, Deputy Speaker, this government shines a bright light into the problems in the financial services sector wherever it exists. Industry super, retail, financial advice, it doesn't matter, because we know that we're on the side of one group of people and one group of people only: the Australian people, consumers, their freedom to choose and their freedom not to be ripped off. And one day, if the opposition wants to join us in that crusade, we welcome their support and their participation. But all I have seen as chair of the Economics Committee and in this Parliament is their constant efforts to undermine and interfere and run interference against that core task, because they would rather favour the interests of the few and their friends at the expense of the Australian people. And that is one of many reasons why they sit on the opposition benches. And to hear the arrogance that comes from the member for Whitlam, to dare say that this government is doing anything to undermine Australian superannuants, I have never heard such an absurd and fantastical statement in this chamber. And trust me, we all hear a few. It was the member for Whitlam and his other fellow members on the opposition benches in the lead up to the last election, which deliberately introduced a policy and proposed a policy that would destroy the retirement savings of millions of Australians through a retiree tax, where they would literally shove down the financial stairs 80-year-old single women because they had sacrificed and saved to be independent in their retirement, and their solution was to deny them their income and push their heads below the poverty water. I have never seen a more despicable act than the members opposite, who continued to rationalise it every step of the way. And we held public hearings and exposed directly to the Australian people what Labor's plans were. And they continue to say, oh no, those campaigns were misleading and they deceived people. How could you say that when the people who were speaking were those who were saying exactly the impact it was going to have on them? When they were talking about how they were going to be undermined and be pushed down the financial stairs and have their heads held below the poverty line water. You're calling them liars when you say that. You're not calling members on the government liars, you're calling them liars, the Australian people. And it's because you wouldn't listen and you wouldn't learn the lesson and you wouldn't understand or show any empathy of the impact it was going to have that you've found yourself on the opposition benches. And this amendment and all of the position of the Labor Party and the Economics Committee since has shown us they have not learned that lesson. They still will not listen. And you pay a huge political price. But many Australians continue to live under the fear of what would happen if there were a change of government. Many Australians sit there every day and think, if there's a change of government, is Labor going to come after me because they can't manage themselves? They can't manage the government finances. They will ultimately come for my hip pocket when they waste their own. And we all know it's true, Deputy Speaker. It doesn't matter what the issue. Labor can't manage money. And when they run out of money, they come after yours. And the leader of the opposition, the current leader of the opposition, is the exceller in this space. No Australian believes that he has any economic credibility or has any capacity to lead this country. Not even his own Labor members do, to their credit, I might add. The question is why they continue to follow someone who's going to send them off the political cliff. And even tawdry amendments like those made to this bill are a classic demonstration of why. Now, this bill is trying to fix up many of the problems that have been faced in the financial advice sector to enable financial advisors to go on and support their clients with, and customers with confidence, to make sure that there are proper mechanisms in place where people who do wrong are held accountable for it. The establishment of a single disciplinary body is an incredibly important step in correcting not just some of the issues that arose out of FASIA and its obligations to put on financial advisors, which made it harder for them to operate, but also to consolidate it so that financial advisors have a body that they trust and understand that they play a critical part in fixing the system. Now, there are reservations I have about this bill. Many members may know I have ongoing concerns about the operations of ASIC, and we hope under its new leadership that it will fulfil its function properly. But some of the functions of FASIA have gone into ASIC to make sure that it can operate successfully in the best interest of financial advisors. But in doing so, ASIC needs to make sure that it's backing financial advisors, not undermining them. Last week, again, at the Economics Committee, we heard directly from financial advisor representative body groups, as well as the financial advisors themselves, of the harrowing increase in costs of ASIC fees and how it's undermining their business. And let's not pretend otherwise. When financial advice fees for financial advisors go up from ASIC, the cost is paid by customers through higher costs over time. And so increases in costs hurt the capacity for Australians to access financial advice at the stage of life they need them. Increases the cost of financial advice in comparison to the capital they've saved. Eats into the capital they've saved to invest for their future. So ASIC should look very clearly at what its conduct is doing to financial advisors and whether it's going to have an impact on the number of operators in the system. Because we know what the cost is, Deputy Speaker, of higher financial costs and higher costs to access financial advice. It means the rich get the advice and the poor don't. The frugal who want to save and get ahead are denied, while those with trusts and wealth, hereditary or earned, are able to compound their growth and their opportunity. Financial advice is a critical part of making sure that Australians can get ahead. And we need to make sure that financial advice is accessible to them so they can get ahead. Because we don't want a system that entrenches the interests of the few and the privileged who can afford to pay high upfront costs. I've raised previously in public my concerns around some of the recommendations of the Hayne Royal Commission, including as part of that the obligation to shift towards an upfront fee service model. Because what happens when you do that is it creates a barrier to younger people, to those who are saving and those who want to grow their savings from being able to access financial advice to grow their wealth. The rich can afford it. The wealthy can afford it. Those on high incomes, they can afford it. They can take the upfront hit. But those who are frugally saving from their modest salaries and may not come from means are the first to go, this is too costly for me. So it compounds the impact and compounds the growth and the wealth conservation and wealth growth that the rich get. And that's incredibly dangerous. We know with the opposition, their first position on the Hayne Royal Commission was to accept the recommendations without even seeing them, which shows how scant and disregard they have to the wealth creation opportunities of the next generation of Australians. Now, there have been amendments, and I'll continue to raise my concerns, as other members in this parliament do. And I see some outstanding members like the member for Ford, who has never been afraid to stand up for the capacity for financial advisors to be able to deliver for their clients. Never. And has always been the friend of the consumer and has been prepared to stand up for the wealth creating opportunities for every Australian. Let's face it, if we actually believe in the wealth creation of every Australian, we'd actually talk about why home ownership is the biggest financial decision that Australians can make, and superannuation is the second. But because we have an obsession between the collusion of the Labor Party and their mates in the industry super fund sector, they constantly try and put superannuation ahead of home ownership, so much so that they'll literally run interference to keep super funds being able to buy homes at the expense of young Australians. There is no more despicable act that I can think of in terms of public policy than the deliberate effort to socially engineer, to empower capital, big super to own homes, but to deny young Australians their chance at their dream. Because the members on the other side of this chamber somehow argue that they know best, that they know how to make financial decisions for others better than young Australians are able to make them for themselves. Well, there's a day of reckoning coming for the members on the other side of this chamber, because Home First, Super Second is absolutely building a movement. And Home First, Super Second, there is an absolute understanding that people are looking at how they can utilise their super to be able to buy their own home, because Australians know, like when they access financial advice, that doing so advantages their creation for wealth. That home ownership is not just the best mechanism for people to create wealth, though that is true. It's the best foundation which to build security for your economic future, your family, and the whole of your working life, as well as your retirement. Home ownership is critical to the economic and democratic distribution of wealth in this nation. Home ownership is the foundation in which people build the success of their life for themselves and others. The investment in the status quo and the creation, or the principal economic institution that leads on to the creation of a strong community, strong citizens, as the foundation for a strong nation. That's why we back and will always defend young Australians being able to buy their own home. That's why our order of priorities is always on it for Australians first. That's why we'll continue to support home ownership. and will also support financial advisors so that people can take control of their own financial future.
Order.